Welcome to Two Lit Ladies, the podcast. The Two Lit Ladies, Dr. Katherine McKnight and Deanna Gallagher, are literacy experts and educators who specialize in developing reading, writing, and literacy skills for all students. Thank you for tuning in.
Hi, welcome to Two Lit Ladies. This is Katherine McKnight, and holding down the fort for both Katie and Deanna this week on this podcast. And today I have a very special guest, the awesome Caprice Banks. And Caprice is a teacher in Georgia, and she just published a young adult novel, and I'm so thrilled for her because I've known Caprice since she was a beginning teacher in Chicago and has taught mostly in urban schools, right?
Yes.
Yeah, ELA high school, and now young adult author. So I'm very excited that she is here to explore young adult novels in the classroom and the impact that that can have, not only as an ELA teacher, her perspective, but also as a published author. So welcome, Caprice. Yay!
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, and so if you could tell us, tell our audience a bit about your book and the process that you went through. And her book is Little Girl Grown and available on Amazon for all you listeners. And I'm going to let her kind of take over and tell us what the book is about, what the inspiration was to write this book.
All right. Thank you for having me, Katie. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So, Little Girl Grown is a fiction novel about a young girl growing up in Chicago. And she realized that she lives in between two worlds. She lives in the inner city, Chicago, in the 90s, but she also is on a journey to find love. And I don't know if you know anything about inner city Chicago in the 90s or inner city Chicago now. Love is kind of not the highlight of it right now, nor was it in the 90s. So that is her journey throughout the book. So it's definitely a coming of age story. It goes from about birth to age 13. And it gives a background of the generations before her. So it gives a little background about where grandma comes from, where mom comes from, to show where the main character, Sophronia, Safi for short, is where she's going, or where she comes from in terms of mentality. And this process was very, very interesting. So I was working on an MFA, Master of Fine Arts degree, in 2005. And I entered the program at Chicago State University in poetry because I wrote poetry. And so that was how I got into the MFA program. And a professor of mine ended up reading two of her prose poems at the Writers' Conference that year. And when I listened to them, I was like, wait, that's like that. That's telling a story. Like, that's still poetry, because sometimes poetry can be limiting.
Right.
And
right.
I was like, wait, like that sounds amazing. And they were letters to her. There were letters that she kind of dreamed that her grandmother was writing to her aunt, and vice versa. So one had left the South and went to the North and was telling the other about it. And they were beautiful. So I decided, I was like, whoa, I'm definitely going to do this. And so that was definitely my inspiration. And so I ended up writing 3 prose poems about my hair. Believe it or not. So I wrote 3 prose poems about my hair because I had this, I didn't realize it was a love-hate relationship, but I wanted a Jerry curl when I was growing up, and that was popular, in the Black community. And my mother would be like, "I'm not putting that stuff in your head." So when she would, and my hair is naturally curly, so when she would wash it, when it was, was still wet, I would pretend that I had a Jerry curl.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And of course, and of course, kids that I taught and stuff, the whole
Right.
hair thing
It's
is
serious,
huge,
right?
right? And of course, me being a white girl too, I have super straight hair, but I've always wanted wavy and
Right.
curly hair. And I taught in also on the south side of Chicago, like you in
Yeah.
the 90s. So when you talk about, and your book is talking about that experience, I'm like, wow, there's just so much
Yeah.
familiarity with that context because I
Mm-hmm.
taught in that
Right.
context for 10 years. But I would say that to my students, and my students would look at me like, what? Miss McKnight, are you nuts? Don't you got like hair like Barbie? And I'm like, no, it's not
Right.
blonde. And of course, I'm not getting what they mean,
Right.
culturally. And I'm laughing like crazy about it. But yeah, I always wanted
Mm-hmm.
curly hair.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm telling
So
you, it's
yeah,
crazy.
yeah. But so much of cultural identity is about those, about those
It
things,
is.
about your looks and
Mm-hmm.
hair and all of those things. So you started writing
Yeah,
poetry.
I wrote three prose poems about my hair. And so one was about wanting a Jerry curl, and another was about um, getting my hair pressed. And so that was getting my hair straightened by my aunt, my grandma's sister. And those three prose poems, which were actually stories, they were the foundation of the book. Of then, it was then my MFA thesis. They were the foundation of it. And so I actually ended up not not concentrating on poetry, but writing a nonfiction novel around those three prose poems. And it the way it came together was like very very shocking to me because some of it is loosely based on family stories or things I've heard, and I've written it with the creative with the creative angle to it. And so writing it at one point kind of became emotional, like when I was describing the character. Her name is Saffronia. Her grandmother's name is Cinda. And when Cinda was leaving the South, so there's historical points about the Great Migration, when Cinda was leaving the South, and she left one of her children with her mother, to go to the North and get on her feet, and then she would send for her. But the separation was very very emotional. Like I ended up crying when I was writing that chapter, and it was just a very interesting experience. All throughout the process, there were pieces of the novel where it was just emotional. I cried during that part about Senda leaving her daughter Zella. And then there were some parts where I was writing it and I was laughing hysterically, because part of it is a is a memory, part of it is some other things I've encountered in life, and so putting those together um, was amazing. And so there's this humor in it. I've been told that it is an emotional roller coaster. So I'm guessing that the emotional roller coaster I went on while I was writing it, with the splash of humor here and there, that is what people experience when they read it. That's what I'm learning so far.
So so you talk about your journey, as an author and the emotional um ups and downs of writing, and I can really relate to that because all the books I've written, I haven't written any fiction. All of the 18 books now that I've written are nonfiction, right? And so and research based and such. But I've oftentimes talked about writing about my experience as a mother with a son who has special needs. And and folks always say to me, well, why don't you write about that? Why don't you write about that? Why don't you write about that? And now he's almost 18 years old, and I think I am just at the point emotionally where I could handle it, because it literally takes a piece out of you. But of course, that's the wonderful thing about writing as well, and why we want our kids to develop writing skills is just that thinking process and connecting empathy and understanding with written word, right? So yeah, and so one of the things that you and I talked about, in preparation for the podcast, I said, with young adult literature, And with, there's just so much more and so many more opportunities. I mean, just as a genre, it's just grown so much since I became a teacher in the late 80s. And what would you say to a colleague who would say to you, Caprice, this is all well and good, and it's a lovely book that you wrote, and I understand your passion and such, but I just don't have time. And kids really need to read Canterbury Tales, and I really don't see that young adult literature is really rigorous enough for my students. And, I love the Canterbury Tales. Don't get me wrong. I love teaching it, loved it. However, and I guess that's a segue, what would you say to a colleague? Because I certainly still encounter that.
What excuse me, what I'm encountering is the lack of modern relatable literature. Like in the kids' best interest. So Canterbury Tales was a favorite when I taught it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I love Shakespeare.
Mm-hmm.
And I can definitely, take the themes and relate them to modern day. That's not a problem. But I think the fact that we often depend on the classics is really a dependency on, I've taught this already, it'll be easier for me as a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And so coming out of that comfort zone to say, hey, I'm going to read something new, I'm going to try something new, I think would be the way to go now. I think that's the way to connect with students. Also, I just think that, and I know this because I've had a student tell me that she read the book with her mom and it helped them to communicate better.
Oh,
So,
wow.
so
Yeah.
I'm thinking there's some social emotional learning that can come from this, in addition to the literature side of it. So, being in an MFA program, there's motif throughout. There's simile, there's metaphors, there's onomatopoeia, there's hyperbole, because I know that I would want this book to be, in a classroom or be a choice for students to read independently. And so all of those things are there. So I don't think it makes it any less rigorous. I think that on behalf of the teacher, it would be new, and it would be some investment, that they would kind of need to put into it to make it what they want it to be, or what the students need it to be. And so I've always been a teacher that's been open to doing something new to see how it pans out. And maybe it goes well the first time, maybe it doesn't, but I always sit and reflect about, okay, what could be better? Okay, what do I need to do here? And oftentimes it's the fact that I'm so structured that I haven't given the kids, what the authority that they need to just go ahead and run with it. And when I do just that, it's amazing. It's so eye-opening. And I know for a fact that in teaching writing, it allows students to open up. It's very cathartic. It is therapeutic on so many levels. And I've had some of my kids who are like, "Hey, I don't take anything off anyone." I've had them stand up and say, Miss B, if more people wrote, like, there would be less violence in the world. Yeah,
Wow.
I've
Wow.
absolutely
Yeah.
had that happen. And so I know the
Mm-hmm.
power of writing, but I also know the power of conversation before you allow students to write. And so now I'm gonna work on the social emotional aspect of
Mm-hmm.
writing, to kind of introduce that to teachers, to introduce to students, because I've
Yeah.
seen the
Yeah,
results of it.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And since I started on my journey as an educator, my focus has always been um, to develop the skill set in teenagers uh, to become literate individuals, consumers of texts and creators of texts, and in order to be an enlightened member of a democratic society. I mean, that's really what I'm about. And I find that I'm happiest professionally when my work is most closely aligned with that. And it hasn't really changed that much
Yeah.
since I was 22, and my journey has changed. I'm on a different path than I thought I would be. I thought I'd be a high school English teacher for 35 years. That was fully what I expected to be. And then I wound up being a professor for 15 years and such. But I find that the more I stick to that, the happier I am professionally. It really is about making sure that our students' voices are heard. And yeah, it really is. And so yeah. And again, the shift, you're not teaching the novel, you're teaching, the novel is the vehicle to develop not only the skills, but also the affect that we're talking about as well. Yeah. And that disposition. So as a author teacher, I'm kind of curious. How has the authoring of a novel impacted your teaching? What have you learned from that process that may have impacted your teaching?
I have learned that I think I finally understand why I was called into teaching in high school specifically. Because everybody I talk to and I say, oh yeah, I teach high school. Like, oh,
Yeah.
bless you, like you have to, that's a gift. You have to be called to do that. And I think that because I remember vividly how confusing of a time it was. And that's kind of like the premise of the book. the thoughts of an adolescent, being unsure about everything, the kind of piecing your personality together from other people's personalities that you like, right? Just piecing yourself together and not really knowing who you are. I think that helped me to write the book, but it also helps me to understand my students. And so I tell them all the time, I'm like, like, you don't know what you're feeling right now. Like you'll be upset with me one minute and then we're fine the next. And then, then you don't know how you feel. And I'm like, so I understand your emotions. They're everywhere. And having that understanding, I think opens up a relationship between me and the students where they can come to me when something isn't right or when something's going on at home, and not just to tell me, hey, I got stuff going on at home, so if my work's not on time, then that's why, but actually to help sort through it. And so I write with them. That's what we do. So I think being an author has helped me to practice what I preach to them about writing, about how it is therapeutic and how it, in essence, saved my life and taught me about who I am and, who I want to be. And so they see that, wow, okay, writing really does kind of pave a pathway for you if you decide to allow it. And then giving them advice or having them write something out until a solution comes. And they're like, wow, I wrote out this solution. Yeah, because it was always in you. And I think that's what writing gets to the bottom of. So it's kind of intertwined in the sense that being an author, my students are like, whoa, there's the credibility part. You wrote a book? I absolutely did write a book. Ms. Banks, I'm going to get your book. And then I haven't put any in my classroom library just yet because I want to get the set that has the discussion questions in the back.
Yeah.
So those are the ones I'm going to put in my classroom library, but I have students asking me for it, asking me about it. There are students, I'll be walking through the hallway, kids that I don't even know. They're like, I read your book. And I don't know how they read it.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's some kids who, who have gotten the book from me and, or their parents purchased it and clearly they're passing it around. But I'm so excited about that. I'm really excited.
Yeah, that's very exciting. I remember in the 1990s, Waiting to Exhale by Terry McMillan. They couldn't keep it on the shelves in the library. It kept getting stolen. It was hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the same thing with Sister Soldier's The Coldest Winter Ever. Like I asked the librarian at my school, like, do you have this book? Because mine came up
Yeah,
missing,
yeah.
right? And she's like, we can't keep it on the shelf. And I'm like, yeah, that's a good book. Like, I'm
Yeah.
totally
Oh, and
okay
I
with
love it
that.
when teenagers, say, "Oh, I read this book, and oh, I'm waiting on this book," or they're excited about getting,
Yeah.
and that's just proof too. And I make this argument all the time, is that even if kids are struggling readers, if there is
Yes.
relevant and good literature and novels and books in front of them, they do read, and I see it over and over and
They
over
do.
again and the work that I do in schools. And it belies every single stereotype that folks might have about struggling readers, that they're not going to read, they don't want to read. And I think that is true in some cases. But largely, if you put books in front of kids that are interesting to read, that they can connect to, whether it's Canterbury Tales or Little Girl Grown or Waiting to Exhale or whatever, right?
Hmm.
That you're
Yes.
going to get engaged with it. And so I get very frustrated by programs that constantly give
Hmm.
kids short articles or passages or excerpts to constantly work on skills rather than just letting kids read. And that's always
Yes.
the most powerful, right? So how do we get everybody to listen to us, Caprice? That's what I want to know. It's like you guys did. But of course, the folks, our listeners who listen to our podcast are, drinking from the same Kool-Aid that we are. So,
Right.
so,
Right.
so I'm going to
Exactly.
charge our listeners. It's like, how do we get folks to understand that? Don't buy that program. Buy some books,
Absolutely.
and
Yes.
books that kids are going to find on Amazon and in a bookstore. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So you're seeing and I'm sure your kids are just so excited and thrilled that their teacher is a published author. How cool is that, right?
Hmm. Yes, they are. They've challenged me. When I was in Chicago, of course the manuscript was finished in 2009. I was trying to find the right editor because I knew that that's what was needed. And because of that, my students in Chicago would be like, "Okay, Miss Banks, are you publishing this year? You keep talking about this book you wrote."
Mm-hmm.
And then when I got to Georgia and I told my kids here, my freshmen last year, they they came together and they would be like, "Okay, so let's talk about this book and how we're going to get it published."
Oh, wow.
They
Wow.
absolutely do. And they're like, "Are you going to shout us out, in the book because
Mm-hmm.
we have, we've been telling you this and that." And so
In the acknowledgement
they,
section, yes.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and I absolutely did shout
Yeah.
them out. They were actually my creative writing class. And I have some of them this year, and ironically enough, I thought that they would be tired of me by now, but they're like, "We're gonna start a petition, for you to be our teacher junior year," and I'm like, "Not again."
Yeah,
But,
you need
we
some other experiences, my loves.
right, right. So they're awesome, and so I really appreciate my students for staying on me. And when I told them it was finished, like it's done, like it's here,
Hmm.
they were just like mouths were open, like, "Wait, what?
Yeah, yeah,
Like you did
yeah,
it?"
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, but they definitely encouraged me to do it, and it was time. I found the right editor. It worked out, and so yeah, it was definitely time.
And we know too, that the power of our students, when we model for them our literacy experiences and reading
Yes.
and writing and, what that entails and how empowering that is. I mean, and, all the writing gurus and such in the late 80s wrote about this. So, folks like Linda Reeve and Nancy Atwell, Don Murray,
Yes.
Donald Graves,
Hmm.
etc., and Lucy Calkins all wrote about the power
Hmm.
of, kids seeing, that modeling, and what a tremendous experience of just not only witnessing your process as as an author and your journey as a writer, but also, that translates into things other than writing. Just
Yeah.
seeing, this is your focus and this is what you want to accomplish, and for kids to witness your journey and having to negotiate, well, this path won't work for whatever reason, so now I'm going to try this path instead. Well,
Right.
what a role model, for them to witness, you achieving a goal, and what
Mhm.
we have to go through as adults. And that's the thing, it's like you never
Right.
give up. Good, better, best, never let it rest. Make the good better,
Right.
make the better best, right? So,
Right.
yeah, I remember the first time I showed my students, I was working on my dissertation, and I was teaching high school sophomores and juniors, and we were doing editing, and I put up a piece of my writing, a piece of my dissertation, and
Hmm.
put that up there, and it was filled with comments, from my professor and
Uh-huh.
from my dissertation chair. And one of my students said, "Man, Miss McKnight, don't you just want to give up?" And I'm like, and I just looked at him like, "Yeah, I did when I first saw it." It's like, "Man, I
Right.
thought you were tough on us." And I said, "Well, I'm at a different level, right?" So,
Yeah.
I'm really getting pushed on the arguments that I'm making and my thinking, because I have to prove that I'm capable of original ideas and thoughts, and being able to um, provide evidence for them. That's what the PhD is about. But it was
Right.
just so funny. They're like, "Dang, Miss McKnight, aren't you ready to give up?" I'm like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, I kind of
Yeah.
am." So,
And I tell my students all the time, going to school in the late 80s, early 90s, English for me, when I got something back that had red marks on it, I took it as a challenge to improve it, right? Well, what do I need to do here? Like, let me fix this, or let me think about this idea. I can elaborate more. But a lot of students I'm noticing that got red marks, because I also teach college. A lot of students that got red marks were just immediately discouraged. And so you'll have students say, I'm not a good writer, or I hate writing. And I actually have my students do a spectrum. My college students, on the very first day, we do a spectrum. And one end of the spectrum is I love writing, the other end is I hate writing. And I have to remember not to put the I hate writing spectrum near the door, because I had a student, I know he was on his way out. I was like, "Hey, son, no, like, come back." Come back, it's totally gonna be okay.
he was taking it
So
quite
I have to
literally.
put
Yeah.
I have to put I hate writing on the other end, right? The enclosed end. But I realized that a lot of the students were discouraged, not only by the red marks that they received, but also because I'm realizing a lot of English teachers did not enjoy teaching writing. And I find that is the issue today. It's not going through the writing process. Is I have to grade these papers. And so sometimes we teach it like we are just exhausted about grading the papers, and we haven't even had to grade them yet. And so going through the Chicago area writing program really helped me a lot in learning how to teach my students about writing. And then it helped me more, with my writing. And so I really want to kind of, spread the love of writing, and
Hmm.
help teachers to rediscover writing as well, because how we teach it rubs off on how our students end up feeling about it.
That was certainly how I became a better writer, was when I had to learn how to teach writing.
Yes.
And I didn't get everything that I needed for my teaching, for my licensure program in the late 80s. I had to learn how to do it, but I think a lot of our colleagues, shy away from it because
Yes.
of confidence,
Hmm.
and it's understandable.
Yeah.
And actually, I was the student that if I got red marks all over my papers,
Hmm.
I shut down. I actually just posted an article on this in LinkedIn, about writing, and my experience as a high school student and college student, having very little opportunity to actually write. I can recall, um, in high school, maybe writing 4 to 5 essays or compositions per year. That was it.
Hmm.
And then maybe 2 or 3 research papers, and that's it. And then, I went to a really great college. I attended my undergraduate degrees from George Washington University,
Okay.
and it was there that I was like, "Wow, I don't know how to write at all," and really blew my confidence. But again, it wasn't until I had a professor in one of my English courses, I'll never forget him, Christopher Sten, who just let me kept revising and gave me ideas and gave me a lot of feedback.
Yes, yes,
And that's when I started to learn. And there's a wonderful quote. I can't remember where it's from, but there is no such thing as a bad writer, just a writer that needs more practice.
that's it. That sums it up.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep. Yep. And all writers have writer blocks. All writers, I think, lose confidence about their writing
Yeah. Hmm.
at different points in time, and that's part of the process.
Yes.
And but that was something I did not learn until much later in life, and I really developed my writing skills when I was a grad student. Because you couldn't go to the next level until it was, up to snuff. And I think that's it. We don't allow enough time for practice. It's a lot of stuffing stuff at kids to get them ready for the test rather than the process of inquiry and writing. And we need to counter that, because that's how kids perform well on these high stakes assessments, is when they develop those skills. So
Absolutely. Yeah, the revision
yeah.
process is the takes the most time in writing. And I
Hmm.
tell my students all the time, like, this is not middle school. So your revision is not you rewriting it neater.
Right. And fixing the comma errors that you
Yeah,
indicated.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's
now I'm good
absolutely.
to go. I'm ready to publish it. And so we do a number of revision activities that they really enjoy because it's peer to peer, and they get good ideas and feedback from their peers, and then they go and make it better. And so every writing assignment we have, we do the very same activities. So by the time we finish this last half of the last fourth of the quarter, they're doing them by themselves. They're
Hmm.
critiquing and like, whoa, well, you know what? I got an idea. Like, I would love to see this in your writing. And so I
Hmm.
think when they see that it's a process, and we go through
Yes.
the process before they have to submit it,
It's a
it's
journey.
like, okay,
Hmm.
maybe it's not so bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So, so what's the next book? What's the next project?
So the next project is part two, of Little Girl Grown. It was definitely written when I wrote it for the MFA program. It was written to have a sequel. And so, because it just goes up to about age 13, the next thing to look forward to in part two is, of course, the high school years,
Hmm.
which
Right.
will be
Right.
very interesting. Um, so,
Yeah.
so yeah, that's what's happening. So I've been writing bits and pieces of it throughout the school year. So I don't have like a big chunk, but I have enough to work with, and I have the scenarios that I definitely want to put in. I've been
Hmm.
going back and forth with how I want to begin it. So just playing around with that in my mind, but yeah, definitely Little Girl Grown Part Two. But I'm also interested in writing about writing, and
Hmm.
teaching writing and the experience teaching writing. So I'm interested in that, and I need to see. I probably need to talk to you to see where that goes.
Yeah.
So
Maybe we co-author
yeah,
that, because that's
absolutely.
always in my brain as well
Yeah,
too. Yeah, exactly. And the journey of teaching writing from, yeah, exactly,
yeah,
exactly. And so it sounds like you've got a lot of ideas still, unfinished
yeah,
ideas. It's just
absolutely. And
still
literally,
pursuing. Yeah.
I'm never bored. I've never been a kid that's been bored. Like, I am either people watching or I'm creating characters in my head. So so
Yeah. Yeah.
I could write forever.
Yeah, brain doesn't stop.
Nope.
So, so I wanna thank you again for joining us on our podcast on Two Lit Ladies, and just for our listeners, I will post in the notes section a link to Caprice's new book. I highly recommend it, and be a great one for middle school kids to read and enjoy. It really reflects characters that are from their experience and that they can relate to. So again, Caprice, thank you so much for joining us on Two Lit Ladies. And I'm sure we will hear more from you, more great things.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks again.